bit too much. I'm dedicated to Aurelia, but not quite that dedicated. So yeah, I was in Lisbon for the last week, and I thought, why not come over? And it's always nice to meet other people kind of doing Aurelia development and things like that. So came over. Most people, when you talk about Australia, they know about a few things, mainly things that can kill you. I have probably 2 out of 3 of those in my backyard, and when I go out for a surf on the weekend, you sometimes encounter the third. But I would still recommend coming for a visit. If you haven't been to Melbourne, come check it out, and ping me up on Twitter, and I'll give you a bit of a tour. Past Aurelia projects. So how did I kind of get started with Aurelia? I think it's interesting for context. I won't dwell too much on it, but back in, I think, 2015, we were looking at starting a new project. We had a back-end system with a whole bunch of microservices, and we needed to kind of instrument them, kind of view what they were doing, but also be able to we okay? Okay. Back to the presentation. So what we ended up doing, we looked around at a few different frameworks, Angular, React. I really liked the look of Aurelia, just in terms of the simplicity, convention over configuration, things that I'm sure that all of you kind of already know about Aurelia, but there was kind of a lot of things that attracted us to the framework. So we kind of embarked on a project, and in a month or so we had something up and running. Started out with managing about 6 servers, and now I just dropped in on the team that work on this project still, and they're now managing about kind of 32 servers, I think, through this UI. So I thought it was pretty cool, and they've themed it in dark, which I thought was amazing, because as a developer, I always work in kind of dark background, so I thought that was pretty cool change. We started working with Aurelia when it was kind of, I would say, young, maybe a little immature. It was kind of in the early alpha phase. So when we started working with it, you could see kind of what to do wrong by looking at GitHub issues, but there wasn't really much on how to do things right. So I think it's really cool that today they've got the new docs site, which makes things a lot easier. And also the discourse. So I say, like, anyone, if you haven't seen the discourse, I'd definitely recommend checking it out. Nowadays, getting started is a lot easier. You can kind of jump on, and there's always really interesting discussions happening there. Some of the content from this talk is taken from my book, Aurelia in Action. Towards the end of the presentation, I'll show a discount code, and there's also some free book giveaways as well. So I'll kind of go through that later in the talk. So this talk has kind of 3 key themes, things to kind of take away. So the main themes are SPA authentication. Okay, we're in a different world than what I started in kind of back 8 years or so ago when I first started web development, when we had kind of client-server based authentication with cookies. Now things need to be done in a different way, so I'll give a bit of context on that. I'll then kind of take you through Firebase, mainly the authentication and authorization options. I'll show how to set up some simple authentication in an Aurelia application. And then finally, we'll look at kind of end-to-end, how do you build authentication into an Aurelia application? What are some of the tools that the framework provides that you can use to hook up authentication and authorization in a way that's really like simple and easy, which is always the theme with Aurelia. So out of interest, who's kind of doing single page app development today? Everyone, that's fantastic. And who's using Aurelia today? Just about it, that's fantastic. So I'm speaking to the right crowd. So I won't talk about this too much, but just to kind of say, we've in the old approach where we had client-server authentication, we had to send cookies back and forth between the client and server. If we wanted to save the state on, say, a server farm or something like that, we would then have to save the session that was generated in the database. which created a lot more overhead, more complexity. So even though kind of moving to single-page app development has forced us into a different way of doing authentication, we can't really use cookies anymore. It's actually come with some benefits. So the method that I'm going to be talking about today is JSON Web Tokens. So instead of sending, doing a post to the server and getting a cookie back with a session ID that you send on each request, you now kind of do a post and retrieve a token. And that token doesn't just have an ID, it actually has context. So it should have everything that you need on both the client and the server side without needing to, say, store anything in the database. So it's a stateless model. You can handle server farms for free, and it also means that you don't have to do yet another request to get all of the extra user credentials and claims and things like that, because they're already a part of the token. So yes, it's kind of a change, but I think we got a lot of benefits from that. Who's kind of worked with JSON Web Tokens? Show of hands. Fantastic. So there's a bit of knowledge there, which is good. So probably some of you know a lot more than I do. I kind of know just enough about JSON Web Tokens to be dangerous. So basically the idea is it's kind of like an envelope that contains your username. You generally wouldn't have the password, as I've got in this sample. That's an example of something you don't want to put in a token. But things like claims, like the admin value there, and some basic details. We see this is a claim for Gandalf. You might see a theme. My past development team, there was kind of an obsession with Lord of the Rings, and so I kind of continue it through my examples. But basically the idea is you take the details about the user, and then you basically sign them and send them to the server. You basically create a signature with a private secret that you have on the server, then send it back, and then the client then sends the token back to you. You then basically use that signature that you generated on the server side to basically verify that the token hasn't been manipulated on the client side. Because as you know, it's very easy to grab that token, manipulate it, add some claims, toggle yourself to admin, send it back. So you need to basically on the server side verify that the token hasn't been manipulated, and that's what that signature is for. Okay, and this is an example of how that might be done. So this isn't using Firebase, this is just a simple node example. So in this case, we get a token and we sign it initially. So that's the first part of that workflow. And then after, the next time a request comes in, might be a request to retrieve some data from the server or something like that, we actually verify that token with our secret, which is probably saved on config file on the server or something like that, and send it back. And that way, if someone is malicious, manipulates the token on the client side and sends it back, we're going to compute a different value, and it's going to throw up an error. So it's a way that we can make sure the token is actually secure. So when I think about authentication, I kind of get one of these shivers, when you've been doing development for a while, you get sick of building the same things again and again and again, particularly things that when they break can cause severe problems for you and your users. So these days we don't necessarily need to do that. There's lots of good options. These are 3 of them. So the one on that side, can anyone yell it out? On the far side there? That's right, Azure AD, which is really nice. Kind of nice in that you can use it to connect kind of on-prem identity to a cloud-based auth system. So it kind of gives you a nice hybrid model there. Auth0 actually provides you with the ability to hook up a number of different authentication systems, and also works very well with Aurelia. There's a number of good examples if you look for that one. I've talked to people that have used it very successfully on a number of projects. And the last one you see there is Firebase, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Yeah. So Firebase, in a nutshell, is it basically gives you the ability to just really think about the client-side development. And it does this by providing a number of services out of the box at just the right abstraction level. It's backed by Google, platform as a service. It was actually acquired by Google recently, I believe. And it's kind of similar to the functionality that Azure provides, but in my opinion, a lot of it is just easier to get up and running with. Some of the things that it provides, schemaless database, which is nice, really easy. You can just throw data in there to get started. It also provides you with the ability to add validation rules to that data. So schemaless is nice when you're getting started, and this Firebase is being picked up by a lot of startups as they're starting to build new apps, which is great. But once you actually go live, you want to have the right kind of validations in place to make sure you're not corrupting your database. So Firebase allows you to actually add validation rules to the data going in. So validate that even, say, a postcode is a valid postcode, things like that, to make sure you've got the data integrity there. Authentication and authorization. Today I'm going to mainly talk about the authentication piece. I'll demo that. And I'll talk briefly about how you might tackle the authorization piece. Hosting, monitoring, more, basically everything that you need to get started with an app. So you really kind of just need to, you're going to spend most of your time building out the client side and hopefully less time managing the server side and infrastructure and that kind of thing. Okay. So yeah, as I said, this is kind of be the main focus, authentication and authorization. Here you go. Thank you. Okay, so to get started, as with everything great on the web these days, it's just one npm install away. So just install the Firebase tools, CLI, and you're ready to go. One tip I found after I installed the CLI and tried to get going, I'd run the Firebase commands and they just wouldn't do anything, or they'd give an error. It wasn't immediately obvious, but Stack Overflow told me you just add it to your npm path. It's not clear why the install doesn't do that already. I think it's something that their team might be working on, but for now, just adding that path is a good way to get started quickly. So to get started, in the Firebase console, which I'll go to now, basically create a new project. And once you do that, just click the Add Firebase to your web app button. And this brings up some details. I'll change these keys and whatnot after the presentation, but you can see it's just some basic details that Firebase needs to hook up your client-side app to the server side. So in a minute, I'll show you, how we actually add this to our Aurelia app, but this part is going to become important. You can also create the application through the Firebase CLI. So the Firebase CLI allows you to do app creation, initial creation, deployment. You can deploy your entire app, or with Firebase Functions, which is a way of, it's similar to AWS Lambda or Azure Functions. You can actually deploy just an individual function as well, which is quite nice. So So the basic steps are in the Aurelia world, I typically start with the Aurelia CLI. You could also start with a skeleton application or something like that, whatever is your preferred way of getting started with an application. So create the app, add the Firebase configuration, and that's just that bit that we saw on the previous, when we went into the console, and then set up the auth service. And that's really all you need to do. So we'll go through kind of each of those steps. Firstly, AU new command. Out of interest, how many of the audience using the Aurelia CLI? Fantastic. Yeah, that's great. It's cool to see. I think the CLI has come like an amazing strides in the last year or so. The next thing to do is change the Firebase or add the Firebase config settings. You're going to add those to your index.html file typically for your Aurelia app, and then set up the auth service. So I'm going to go to my sample app. So this is just a simple application. Let me get the right one. I'll just have a look. Here we go. Okay, so just so this probably looks very familiar to anyone that's created an Aurelia CLI application before. So all we've done, firstly, under the app, under the body node, just adding a link to the Firebase library. So there's the Firebase, with Firebase, there's two main libraries. There's the client-side one and the server-side one. So for the Aurelia app, you really just need the client-side one. If you're going to add authorization as well, then you'll also need to add the server-side library and configure that with functions. The next thing you're going to do is change the configuration values. So that basically hooks up to the project that you've just created on the Firebase console. And then just call the Firebase library initialize app function, which actually hooks your application up to the server side using the config settings. So yeah.
Can you delay this, that you first start your application, you get your first tweets, and then do the initialization?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Can you delay the initialization?
Delay the initialization?
So you first get your application up and running, and then in the background start doing these things.
Yeah. So you can. I haven't actually tested that myself. I assume that you would be able to do that. What I've tried so far is just spin up the connection straight away. But I could imagine putting that behind kind of a promise or something like that. I don't see any reason why you wouldn't be able to do that later. So any other questions? I feel like it would be good to throw a box around. Yeah.
So I have I was wondering if there also should be some kind of package you can install in Aurelia for Firebase, because you use the CDN here.
Yeah, so I think there is an Aurelia Firebase package. So from what I saw, it hasn't been updated recently. So I would just I would check probably to see how recent it is. For me, it was simpler just to because the steps are so simple, it's only a couple of lines. I thought avoid the added dependency and just chuck it in. I kind of try to do that wherever possible to avoid adding extra dependencies. Also with Aurelia, because it's such so close to native JavaScript or TypeScript, a lot of the time you can kind of get away without it. So that's kind of what I try to do. But yeah, no, it's a good question. I think there is, but I think it's called Aurelia Base or Aurelia Firebase or something like that. Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Okay. Well, we haven't managed to take anyone's head off yet by asking questions, so that's always a good thing. Yeah, not enough beers yet, obviously. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is add the auth service. So the auth service, actually we'll approach it from the app view model because that's probably the easiest way to see it. So basically all we're doing at the start is we're taking an auth service in the constructor, all pretty basic. I'll come back to this bit in a minute. But basically, what I'll do is I'll show the application now, and then I'll come back to this so that you can see kind of how it's working. Okay, here we go. So just a simple application. Allows you to log in with various auth providers, in this case Google+, Twitter or Facebook. There's a number of other auth providers that you can hook up. So if we go back to the Firebase console and go to authentication and sign in method. So you can actually set up email and password. And when you do that, it's actually interesting. They give you a number of templates that you can use. So, so then Firebase will send out your password kind of reset email, your registration email, and things like that for you, which is quite handy. Obviously, you don't need those kind of email templates for something like Google or Facebook because those auth providers are going to handle those concerns for you. But it's nice that they've got that option as well. GitHub, so all the kind of major auth providers are supported, and it's just a matter of kind of enabling them there. So you don't really need to do any extra work, which is kind of really nice time saver. So then if we look back here, so I'll pick Google+, and my email address. And there you go, I've logged in. So that's actually made a request through to the Google authorization or authentication service. And really there, I didn't need to wire up anything. It was the Firebase client API that was doing all of the heavy lifting for me. With Google, there's not really any extra setup. You just enable it in the console and that's it. With Twitter and Facebook, there's a little bit of extra work you have to do just to add your app API keys. So if you've ever hooked up Facebook or Twitter to do any integration work before, it's just a similar thing to add your API key and authorize it. But that's all you really need to do. And then log out. So it's pretty simple. How's that actually working under the hood? So when we click the login button, it's using something called the auth service, passing in the type, which might be Twitter, Google, what have you. And then we're getting a promise back, which contains the auth details. So they're the auth details that we're going to retrieve back from the authentication provider, like Google or whatnot. And taking that down one layer, so we log in. First thing we do, we get the auth provider, and we've got a number of those supported, Google, Facebook, or Twitter, just to do a few. You could do that you could probably reduce the boilerplate code there a bit, but that's kind of what you get out of the box with the samples. And this is really just using that same Firebase API that we initialized in the index.html. From there, once we know which provider we're actually going to sign up with a pop-up. So the provider-specific pop-up, which again the API kind of provides for you. And from there, you're going to get an auth token, which is going to be sent with each request through to the Firebase API. And then any user credentials that you want to show on the screen. So the details like when we logged in, so do that again. So details like email, anything like that that's available. I think only really email, display name are available from those auth providers, because obviously the API gives you something that's common across all the auth providers. So there's be some things that you might get back from Facebook that you might not get back from Google. So it kind of tries to standardize between those. And then that's kind of returned back to the app, and we just set it on the view model and display it. And just for completeness, to show you the other side of that, all we're doing is this is the app view. Just a click delegate to log in. It's hitting the app view model, passing through to the auth service, and doing the login there. So pretty simple. Any questions on the authentication side of things before we move on to authorization? No? He's good. Yeah, excellent.
I wonder if how you implement pressing F5. Do you remain logged in, or how does it work?
Yeah, that's a good question actually, and that's something that I skipped over. So what happens when you refresh the page is the API actually fires an event. So you get this on state changed event, and when you get that event, it basically checks for the user. The way that it stores it between sessions, so that's how it basically brings it back up in your Aurelia application. The way it actually handles that under the hood is if we do an inspect and go to the application, it's storing the Firebase detail connection, or the JWT really, in here. And if we actually take a look at this token, it's actually pretty straightforward. I've got an example of that I pulled out before. And so this is what it's storing in local storage. So when you hit F5, it's actually the API is going and retrieving this from the browser, does that without you needing to do anything. You just hook into that event and check that it's actually brought that user back up for you. And then from there, you're good to go. So it's all just kind of local storage and the API helping you again by raising an event. Cool, okay. Great question. Okay, so that's kind of as simple as the authentication side of things is.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Well, what happens when you press F5 after the expiration date time expires?
I haven't tested that.
Because
yeah, it's a good question.
You leave the browser open. You set expiry date 1 hour or something. You hit F5 after that. What will happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I assume that you would get an event saying from that event that we saw, saying
what will happen to
you
the?
weren't.
How does the
So
front end react on that?
You'd have to handle that yourself within the Aurelia application. So you would get basically an event. It would say that the user wasn't signed in. You'd then have to basically sign them out using the Firebase API.
Would the refresh tokens or?
So the refresh token would still stay in local storage. I haven't seen mine get removed in the testing, but it would be an expired token. So the server side, so the Firebase server would basically, would actually verify that it was expired, return you an invalid response. So you get an invalid response, you get an event raised, I think, from the Firebase client API. Then you'd have to handle that, log the user out and redirect them. So yeah, so it will basically give you the plumbing, I think, for it, but you'll actually have to handle the client side of it, on your own inside the app, which I guess makes sense because everyone's going to want to handle how they kind of move the users around differently. like in one application that we do, we show a modal dialogue when that happens, and another one we just force them back to the login page.
But let's say you put the expiration date on 15 minutes. You still be working on it. Can you refresh?
Refresh the
50
token.
minutes. I'll be working. 15 or 40 minutes, 59 seconds, and then kabang!
All
dies. Is there a way to
I'd have to
keep
check
it
the
alive
docs.
when you're interacting with the interface?
My understanding is there should be a way of doing that. The way I've done it when I've implemented myself in the past, the libraries tend to provide a refresh token mechanism. So I assume that this client library has a similar thing. But yeah, I have to check the docs to be sure. But it would make sense because you obviously don't, you want to be able to refresh that token. You don't want to be knocked out after half hour, particularly if you're filling out like a massive form, you go through,
otherwise
like
you set
a
an
project.
expiration date on 1 day, 2 days or so. It will be big enough to complete the survey or whatever you're doing, but that's
exactly.
a bit tricky.
Well, my brother works for the Australian Heart Foundation, and they have forms that will take people kind of days to fill out. So you can imagine, exactly. Imagine you get partway through that, it kicks you out. With those kind of scenarios, obviously you'd want to be saving the state to the server side as you go, and then you'd have something to get back to that state. But definitely you want to have something to handle refresh tokens as well.
There's no interaction with the server. If you have this form, this gigantic form already on your screen, it's on the client side, and you're just happily typing in, and you're not sending anything to the server. Then that's the hard part. What I did for the standard case is just give a new token when the half of the expiration time is over. So just get a fresh one while you're still here, But if you're out of luck, then you just are 1 second behind, and then miss your window, and then you still have to log in again. There's not really so much you can do unless you want to give up the whole stateless mechanism and keep state on the server, which is exactly what you don't want.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not easy, and there's kind of patterns that you can do to make the user experience less painful, I guess. But at the end of the day, that's one of those tricky problems, I guess. So okay, great questions. Thank you. Keep them coming. So could we take this Firebase stuff further? Yes. So we've only kind of scratched the surface of what you could do there. So with Firebase functions, what you can do is they give you basically triggers. So for example, when a user registers, do something. When a user logs in, do something. There we go. Yes. Obviously. Obviously my token was expired and it booted me out. So basically, what we could do there is when a user registered, Firebase gives you the option of adding claims to that user. And those claims could then be used for authorization and things like that. I haven't added those in my demo, but looking at it, it doesn't look to be that difficult. Additional auth methods. So we set up some basics with Google, Twitter, and Facebook, but as you saw, there's more that we could do. The neat thing about this is that you don't need to completely opt into the Firebase ecosystem in order to adopt just the Firebase auth stuff. So you could have a custom, say, Node REST API and just pass the authentication piece off to Firebase. Which is nice. They've got ways of kind of managing that. And to do that, you'd take a dependency on the Firebase server API. Yeah, good question.
How would you go about authorization-wise with this? I don't really understand how this clicks with the different types of logins that you have. For instance, if you have some kind of role or account type or whatever you want to call it, you have to set this up beforehand. Some admin person has to say, okay, Sean is a nice guy, he gets a lot of rights, and I don't like that guy very much, so he gets very little rights. So how does that work? Because you have to prepare that,
Yeah.
and you have to sort of attach it to some sort of known
Yeah.
identity, but you can choose from a whole bunch of identities.
That's right. Yeah. So the claims basically get stored in the Firebase database. So you would still, if you had a custom, say REST API, you'd still need to opt into the Firebase database just to store the claims associated with that identity, because obviously you want those stored with the identity, because you don't want that to be able to manipulate that somewhere else, because then the token becomes invalid. So that piece you'd need to take a dependency on.
At what time does the identity actually goes into existence? Is that the moment where you decide, okay, I'm going to use my Google Plus login, and then
Yeah.
so you have to log in first, and then you get your rights. It's not the other way around, right?
Yeah. So when you basically log in to the application for the first time, what it does, have a look at the console, is it basically registers your identity in the console here. That also raises that register event that I was talking about, and you can hook into that via a Firebase function. When that happens, you've got the identity, so you can add the claims. Those claims then get stored against the user in the database. So when you check the database here, any claims that are added to users, you'll kind of see added to this Firebase database here. And then the way that authorization works is those claims are then tied to rules. So the rules determine for a particular user they can do this thing. So it's kind of spread it into kind of different parts. So the identities are housed, they're managed in Firebase. They're created when you register. That identity by default won't have any claims associated with it. You need to do that yourself. When you associate claims with that identity, then that identity is tied to a particular user ID. So say me on Facebook and me on Twitter are two different things. There may be a way of joining those identities, but I haven't seen that yet. So then, yeah, the claims are in the database. They're tied to a particular user ID. Then if you implement, say, a custom REST API, then when you receive the token from the client side, you would make a call through to the cloud API to actually verify the token's validity and things like that. So that's kind of how the different pieces of it fit together.
So it's a two-stage process. The initiative is at the user to just register himself. From there, you can assign rights and everything.
That's right, yeah. So the examples I've seen are typically done when the user registers. So you'll do it based on some kind of rule or something like that. And then you could also develop a UI for assigning claims. But that UI would have to be, you'd have to develop that separately. There's nothing that Firebase gives you out of the box to do claims management and things like that. It gives you all the building blocks, but it doesn't give you like a pre-built thing to just go and work with it.
And you have to make sure that you're going to use the same identity from that point onwards, because if you next week decide to use Facebook or Twitter.
Yeah, exactly. Then you're a new person. So yeah, that's right. But yeah, I imagine there's probably a way of joining them up. But I know that was what kind of a lot of service providers initially had trouble with, because people would, I think even Stack Overflow maybe when they started up, because people would sign in with one account, they'd go to another one and then raise a ticket with help desk saying, where's all my stuff gone? Yeah, it's not you, it's the other you. So yeah, it's confusing. Okay, so taking things further, now we're going to get into the more Aurelia specific side of things. So with Aurelia, you guys have probably covered a lot of these in the past, but I just think it's kind of worth exploring different tools that Aurelia gives you that makes an authentication system possible. So when I kind of thought about it and listed them out, there's the auth service that you need, an interceptor, a pipeline step, a value converter, and a layout. And with those things, you can just about do what you want with auth. So the auth service basically serves as a glue. So this is what's going to basically hook up, and I'll actually dive into the code for this as well. So this is a separate sample application. If I can get to the right version. Yep. So the auth service is what's going to basically bring most of the different pieces together. It's what's going to handle your token interception and things like that. If we go back to our model from earlier in the presentation, just to kind of have an overview again. So the workflow basically goes like this. We post a token to the server, and the way that we do that is, one way of doing that would be to send, say, post a username and password, and we get an access token back. That token then gets stored, and we'll walk through this workflow as we go, with more help from our friends at Lord of the Rings. Service, which we're using as glue to make sure that the user's an admin, and then filter out the list of routes that we're actually going to return to make sure that the user only sees the routes that they're authorized to see. And jumping back to list. So we intercept the request, append the bearer token, which we've retrieved from local storage. And the next thing actually that I missed was a pipeline step. So hands up who's worked with routing pipeline steps before. Fantastic, everyone. Okay, that's good. So everyone is already pro at this, so that's fantastic. So basically, Aurelia provides a number of cross-cutting pipeline steps. These are used to make sure that you don't need to implement the same kind of operations in every view across your application. The one that is probably used most is authorize, but there's also other ones like pre-activate and things like that. So why not just add something like this to the can activate lifecycle step, component lifecycle step? We could do that, but the don't repeat yourself police says no. We don't want to do that in every view in our application because it's just going to create too much boilerplate code. And with Aurelia, we want to steer clear of boilerplate code, obviously. So what we want to do, use a pipeline step. Next thing, we use a value converter. This is used to guard against unauthorized access by filtering out all of the routes that we don't want people to see. You've seen an example of that. And layouts. So layouts are actually quite convenient. So if you notice, go back to this application, and when we're logged in, we see the navigation menu. But when we're logged out, we see a completely different view. So one of the things that Aurelia allows you to do is define different layouts, and you can think of these as similar to your MVC layouts. So where with MVC you might have a layout for, say, a login page, a different layout for the rest of the application. You can do the same thing with Aurelia actually, and the way that you define them is when you're configuring the router. You can define particular routes and link them to particular layouts. So in this example, I've got two layouts. I've got a main layout, and I've also got a login layout. That's kind of linked. The frustrating thing is you can't define like a default layout. It would be nice if you could define, say, I want my routes to by default use the main layout, and then only override it to use a different one on, say, the login page. You can't do that as yet, but that'd be a cool feature, I think. So if we have a look at the login layout, this basically uses some different styles, and it also uses layouts allow you to define slots, which actually use the shadow DOM under the hood. Have you guys used shadow DOM slots in layouts before? Yeah. So I think that's kind of a really nice way that Aurelia leverages the features of the shadow DOM and web component specifications to actually make that kind of nice and easy. Okay. That's where you see different layout for login, different layout for the main view. What this means is we don't have to have a lot of conditional statements in our layout page. And you've seen the demo. And yeah, thank you everyone for listening to the presentation. Are there any more questions at this stage? Yeah.
These layouts, you type them all in the router viewer, I guess.
Yeah.
You could do with a script, I guess. So you say when the router names login, just use the login and all the others, so you don't have to type, write it down all yourself.
That's a good suggestion. Yeah, reduce the boilerplate code. So that's you kind of do it dynamically rather than declaring it all out.
Yeah.
So yeah, that'd be a good way of doing it. I like it.
You could write a few some arrays when it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's a good suggestion. So I find the routing configuration.
With the activation strategy or something.
Yeah.
First time we wrote it in all views, but you could.
Yeah, exactly. Define just
all these routes have. You should use these strategies.
Yeah, and that would that'd be a much
code from all the views.
That's right. Yeah, and that would be a much more convenient way of doing it. I noticed that the route, it's probably a good thing to tackle on the routing configuration specifically, because I noticed that can get quite loaded, and this is with a small sample app. It's already kind of
Two
like
routes and it was
exactly.
the whole screen
So
full with the code.
yeah, exactly. So
Throw it in.
Yeah, exactly. If it's kind of a one-liner just to apply it conditionally. So it's good. Good suggestion. Any other questions? Cool. Okay. Fantastic. So there's a discount code available for the book for both the online listeners and people in the audience. And also, if you, my Twitter ID is there. If you follow me on Twitter, I've got 5 free books to give away. So the first kind of 5 people to follow me on Twitter get a free book. Yeah, I don't see people getting their phones out. Come on, guys. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
We have a small gift bag for you to thank you for presenting.
Oh, thank you very
radio
much.
stuff is edited.
Fantastic. Thank
you very
you.
much. I know you will be jumping to the next presentation.
this session of Build with Aurelia. My name is Roy and I'm a software developer here at the factory. And since we're hosting all these Aurelia meetups, we thought it would be nice to show you some of the cool stuff that we've been building here using this framework. So I'm really excited to show you our survey web application that we've built here. So let's get started. First, let me walk you through the agenda of this presentation. So I'll start by giving you some background on eFactory, what we do here as a company, and some background on the application, where we came from and what the challenges were in this project. Then you'll see the application in action. I'll give you a short demo. You'll see how it works and what it can do. Then I'll go a bit more into the technology. I'll show you our technology stack, so all the technology that we've used. And then there are some Aurelia features that we've used in this project that I want to go a bit more in depth on, namely bundling with the Aurelia CLI, custom elements, custom attributes, and I'll briefly explain them and then show you how we use them in our project. Finally, I'll wrap up the presentation, and at the end there's time for questions and discussion if you have any questions. So first, a little background on eFactory. So eFactory basically helps improving organizations from within by collecting feedback and knowledge from their employees. We believe that the employees in an organization know exactly how to improve the organization and how to do it. So we collect their feedback, we analyze it, and we give the results back to the organization. And we help them with the meaningful insights that they gather from that feedback. Now it's really important to have as many people as possible to fill in that survey. Our response rate is very important. So I'm just curious, who of you has ever filled in a survey or a questionnaire? I'm guessing about everyone. And who of you have ever filled in a survey by your employer, so that your company sent out? Oh, not that many. Well, if you think your company that you work for could use some insights from the employees, you can recommend eFactory to your HR department. All right. So if you've ever filled in a survey, you know that it can be very boring and tedious, especially if you have to fill out a lot of questions. So the challenge here with this project was to create a very fast and fun and easy way to fill in a questionnaire. Now, of course, eFactory has been around for about 20 years, so we started with just, paper surveys. Then we got a web application, so we already had an old survey app, but that looked like this. So that looks pretty outdated. Even 5 years ago, this would have been very outdated. So for the people that are English, so the bullet points are the questions, and there are statements like, I'm satisfied at my work, and then you can answer from strongly disagree to, well, that type of question. This must be familiar. So yeah, we really needed an upgrade, or actually we didn't upgrade it, we just created a whole new app, of course. So without further ado, I would like to show you what the new application looks like. So how it works that, so each employee in the organization gets a private link, and then when they go to that link, they have their the questionnaire, and it's anonymous. So this is what, here's a link to a privacy statement. Some other things, so here I've used the background of beautiful Amsterdam at night, but this is customizable for each customer. So, and the logo as well, and the color scheme as well. So each customer can have their own background and have their own identity in this questionnaire. So for example, I also have a link from KLM, already had it open here. So this is something that KLM would, which is one of our customers, might want to do, so to create their kind of own brand identity with the questionnaire. All right, so once you're ready, there's also a language switcher here. Let's leave it to English. When you click Get Started, it takes you to the first subject. So a questionnaire consists of subjects, and then each subject has a certain amount of questions. I click Next, and it takes me to the first question. So it's usually a statement, and then you can click one of the answers, or you can click I don't know or have no experience. So let's say click Agree. All right, so what happened there is that it automatically took me to the next question, so I don't have to go to the next question myself. I can just click an answer, and it just takes me to the next card. Also, it's interesting that only one question is really central in the screen at the time. So we really focused on that one question. So if I click on an answer, it takes me to the next question. But I can also click the cards to go back, and I can also scroll on my own. And if I stop scrolling, it takes me to the closest element on the page. So in this demo survey, we included every possible way of displaying a question. So this is actually the same type of question, but it's displayed with hearts, so you can click on it, and then there's a nice little animation, and it takes you further. Usually you'd pick one of these types, so you wouldn't mix these all around in the questionnaire, but you'd pick like this one, or all hearts, or all stars, or smileys. So this is the next subject. Right, so if you want to have more specific answers, you can also do that, and then it's displayed like these buttons. So this is a question about your workload, and you can click one of the options. Well, my workload's all right. Also, the content of the questionnaire can change depending on the answers you give earlier. So here the question is, I've experienced undesirable behavior by colleagues. Well, if you click occasionally or regularly, it creates a new question here that asks you which type of undesirable behavior you have experienced. If I click never, that question wouldn't show up. So up until now, other questions where only a single answer was possible. This question has multiple answers possible, so it doesn't automatically take me to the next question. I have to click the button here or scroll on my own. Well, luckily I haven't experienced any of these, so I'll just skip this. This question is what is known as an NPS question. So it's you can say how much you would recommend something, so from 0 to 10. We have two variants of these. This is the more formal one, where you can just pick an answer. This is a more playful one. I can drag a slider, then a smiley pops up, and I can make it very happy or very, very sad if I give a low score. So yeah, this is yeah, this is a cool one. Another type of question where I can just type something. This is an improvement question, so I can, it asks me which things do I think I can improve in the organization, can be improved. And then depending on my answers here, it creates follow-up questions. I can also click other, type my own subjects, and then it's created here. So these are all the types of questions that you can use in this survey application. Now once you're done, you get taken to this, this submit button. It's not mandatory to fill in every question, but you have to submit it to make them final. So when I click submit, there's a nice little animation. And then I filled in my survey. So this is also responsive, so it works on tablet and mobile as well. Let's show that. Let me refresh. So it's basically, most of the questions look the same, but they're just a bit more compact. It's actually really easy to fill in on your mobile phone. It's really quick. So they look the same, except for the text. We made like a pop-up thing, because the keyboard would show up at the bottom of your screen, and then that would push the app on top, and then it would take you to the next thing. So we fixed it this way. All right, so now that you've seen the application, I want to talk a bit more about the challenges that we considered during this project. I'd like to note that the design was already created by a design agency that we often work with, called United. It's called Hike One now. But they created the design for us, so we already knew how it was going to work, what it looked like. So considering the design, we had the following challenges. Well, Of course, the application has to render the content dynamically based on which questions you want to ask. It has to be very fast, perform well. If it's kind of buggy or laggy, people would get angry or at least frustrated and stop filling in the questionnaire. And it had to be responsive, so it has to work on all kinds of devices and platforms. So we started developing this about a little more than a year ago. And why did we pick Aurelia? Well, back then we had used Angular 1 on some projects, but we didn't like the lots of boilerplate framework stuff, and we were kind of impressed with Aurelia, how clean it was, everything. And also we wanted to try something new. We always try to use the latest technologies in projects here, so we ended up with Aurelia. We were a bit worried that we would run into problems because the Aurelia community is kind of small and there's not much on Stack Overflow and that sort of thing as opposed to, let's say, Angular. But we have a core member on our team, Erik, who organized the meetup, so we call him Erik Aurelia here. So that didn't end up being a problem. And we learned a lot about Aurelia in this project as well. So let's get a bit more into the technology. This is our technology stack. So for the front end, we used Aurelia, obviously, in combination with TypeScript. Gulp, which is already included in your Aurelia project if you create it with the CLI. SCSS as a preprocessor for CSS. And we used Visual Studio Code as our editor with the Aurelia extension that Erik created. So that was pretty cool. The backend was just an API that fetches the questionnaire data and your participant data and saves the answers and stuff. And that's just a .NET Core application created hosted in Microsoft Azure. So now I'm going to tell you a bit about some of the features that we've used and how we use them in the project. So of course you can bundle your application in various ways. You could use something like Webpack or GSPM. But we created this project with Aurelia CLI, which a couple of you are using already. And there's a bundling functionality in there as well. So we figured we'd just use that. So Aurelia bundles your application into two files, the app bundle and the vendor bundle. And it's really easy to do that with CLI. I'll just show you how our configuration for our project. So this is your Aurelia JSON file, and by default it bundles into the app bundle, which contains all your application code. And the vendor bundle might be interesting to show you some of the libraries that we've used. Well, of course, all the Aurelia things. We used TweenMax, TweenLite, sorry? I don't think I can. Maybe a bit. Control? No. No? Oh, wait. Oh, wow. So for all the animations, we used a library called GreenSock. You can Google that, GreenSock, and TweenMax and TweenLite are plugins. Scroll2 is also an animation plugin from GreenSock. Morph SVG, which we used for the smiley slider. So we basically had 10 SVGs of states, and then with Morph, it animates them very smoothly. So that was really useful. I18 Next for translations, and Hammer.js for tap and touch events on mobile. Yeah, this is your bundling configuration. If you create your project with the Aurelia CLI, it generates this build task for you. So you can just leave it as it is, and it does all these build steps for you. We created a custom build step that we've added here, Localize. Localize is a translation management tool for software developers that we use. And the Localize step, basically what it does is it fetches, or it calls the Localize API and then fetches all the translations and puts them into JSON files that we include in the bundle. So that's something that we've added here. But you can write your own stuff and add that to your build steps. So it's really simple to start bundling. You just type au build. You can also add an optional parameter to specify your environment. Well, that's optional. Just run build. So here you see this is our localized tab, and it updates all these translations. As you can see, we have a lot of languages. So now it's creating the app bundle, it's tracing all your application code. And also the libraries to create your vendor bundle. And then it should be done in a second. All right. So now basically what you can do if you want to deploy your app is you can just copy the index.html file and your script folder. And the script folder contains your app bundle and your vendor bundle. You can copy those to your deployment server, and then your app is basically running.
If you just deploy the whole script folder, you can also deploy the map file.
If you deploy you saw the map file. Sorry, what was the question?
The question is, why would you want to deploy the map file to a production server?
Oh, I'm not sure. I don't think we deploy that actually.
Okay,
Yeah.
it said somewhere on the slide that you just take the script folder. Not really. Okay.
No, you take the index.html file, and that has a link to your vendor bundle, and that's a script folder that you have to copy as well.
Not the whole folder.
No, not the whole folder. No, no, sorry. Yeah, yeah. Usually you can have more things in your script folder, or that was the case. But you can. The minimum that you need to copy is the index.html and the app and the vendor bundle. Yes. So another way you can use bundling is to create versions, or in this case, snapshots of your application. This was a very convenient functionality for us because we have our customers have an organization, and that organization is divided into groups of participants, and they might want to ask different sets of questions and different versions of questions to different teams within our organization. So what we did was we have some other software that we've developed here as well that our project managers use. And in that software, they can create a questionnaire, so they decide which questions and subjects there are in the questionnaire, and they can configure the design. And then once they're done, they can publish, as we call it, that questionnaire. And what happens at that point is that the app bundle in the release blob, that's where we deploy the latest versions to. A blob, by the way, is blob storage, Azure Blob Storage. That's basically a way of storing files in the cloud, unstructured data such as image files or anything. And then when you publish the questionnaire, it copies that app bundle to a customer blob, and it creates these customer-specific questionnaire bundles for each version of the questionnaire. And when we do a new release, we deploy something new, those bundles that are in the customer folder stay the same. So that way we can guarantee that each participant of that questionnaire gets the same version of that app, and it doesn't break or change because of a new release. Also during this publishing process, a JSON file is generated, a questionnaire.json file, and that contains all the data about the questionnaire, so which questions there are on the questionnaire. So the next feature that I want to talk about is custom elements. Well, if you've used Aurelia even a little bit, you know what these are, so I won't go into that too much. But it's basically the way that you can divide your app into smaller reusable components. And this really appealed to us because we knew that the app had to be rendered dynamically based on content of the questionnaire. So we just create custom elements for each type of question and then use that JSON file to convert that into an object, and then we can bind all this data to all the question elements. So this is an example. So we have a question element, that's basically the cards that you saw, so that's the question element that contains business logic for things that have to do with questions, so saving answers or updating the progress bar. And then for each display type of question, we created another custom element which we can bind data about the question and the answers to, and that way it gets displayed like this. So we created these elements for each question type, and then it renders dynamically. So that was a really cool way of using these custom elements. Final feature that I want to talk about is custom attributes. So custom attributes can be used to alter the behavior or add functionality to your DOM elements. So usually how this works is you create a custom attribute class, and you can attach that attribute to an HTML element. And usually when you use a custom attribute, you want to do something with the DOM element. And the cool thing is that if you inject the global DOM element type in that class, you have access to that element in that class. So you don't have to search the DOM yourself to find that element that your attribute is attached to, but you already have it accessible as a property in your class. So the way we use attributes here is to get information from the DOM elements. As you saw in the demo, only one element can be active at the same time. So this could be a subject header or a question card or the final block with the submit button. So each of these elements that can be active and snapped to by the app, we call those scrollable. And we needed something to keep track of all these elements and their coordinates and their height, so that the app knows which element should be in the center. And if you start scrolling yourself, or if you click a button to go to the next question, it has to know how far it has to take you to the next question. So we created a scroll service that has a list of all these elements that can be scrollable. So here I've created a scrollable custom attribute. Let me use, oh, you don't see the mouse. Anyway, so you see there, inject DOM.element, and then in my constructor there, I have this private element property, and that property contains that div element that I've used the attribute on. So in the HTML, it says scrollable, that's the custom attribute, and then I have that element inside my class. And in that attribute, I call the scroll service to store that element. And then the scroll service knows the coordinates and the height and can handle the snapping. All right, so let's wrap this up. So I've shown you how the application works. I've shown you some of the features, how we use them for our application. It was a really cool project to work on. It was very, a lot of front-end heavy work. It was not the usual CRUD app. It was really a cool thing to work on. And we really enjoyed working with Aurelia. So we are very happy with how it turned out. It works very smooth, it performs well. We got great reactions from our customer. So we've actually had such a good experience with this project that we've actually been using Aurelia for all our projects now, basically. So I hope you got some inspiration or ideas from this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. That's it, thank you. Questions or remarks?
It looks amazing. It's like you guys have done a great job with it.
Thank you.
It looks amazing. The only thing I was, first question you showed was the color code was red and green.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
line. I saw you had a little note, so it says.
yeah, when you hover, it says.
But that's kind of tricky always. Maybe it says only the graphic design, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
We actually tested this with someone from a company who employs a lot of people with a disability, and they gave us a report, and we still need to fix some of those issues. They're very happy with the parts that it did one question at a time, because that's good for the stream.
For focus, for the focus.
Mm-hmm.